Captain Elena Rodriguez stared at the massive ships that had just appeared on her screens. The alien vessels were huge, each one 10 times larger than her own ship, the Pioneer's Dream. Their dark metal hulls gleamed with strange blue lights, and energy crackled around weapon ports that looked big enough to swallow her entire bridge. "Ma'am, they're sending a message," said Lieutenant Davis from the communications station. His voice shook slightly. "Put it through," Elena said, trying to keep her voice steady. This was humanity's first contact with alien life, and it wasn't going the way anyone had hoped. The main screen flickered, and an alien face appeared. The creature had 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern on its elongated skull. Its skin was a pale green color, and when it spoke, its voice sounded like grinding metal. "Primitive vertebrates," the alien said, its words somehow translated by their computer systems. "I am Admiral Kethvar of the Zephyrian Concordat. You will surrender your vessels immediately and submit to processing. Your species will serve the Concordat as workers in the outer colonies." Elena felt her heart racing, but she forced herself to remain calm. "This is Captain Elena Rodriguez of the Terran exploration vessel Pioneer's Dream. We come in peace, seeking dialogue and mutual understanding between our peoples." The alien's 4 eyes blinked in what might have been amusement. "Dialogue? You speak of dialogue when your entire species possesses the technological sophistication of children playing with fire. Your ships are made of simple metal and burn. Chemical fuel. Your weapons could not scratch our hulls. There will be no dialogue, only submission." Behind Elena, her tactical officer whispered urgently, "Captain, our sensors are picking up energy readings I've never seen before. Their shields alone are generating more power than our entire ship." Admiral Kethvar continued speaking. "You have 30 seconds to surrender, or we will demonstrate why the Zephyrian Concordat has ruled this sector of space for 3,000 years. Elena looked around her bridge. Her crew of 43 men and women had volunteered for this mission, to explore beyond known space. They had families back on Earth, dreams of discovery, hopes for humanity's future among the stars. She couldn't just hand them over to slavery. "Admiral," she said carefully, "surely beings as advanced as yourselves can see the value in peaceful coexistence. We have much to learn from each other." 20 seconds, Kethvar replied coldly. Elena's mind raced. The 2 escort frigates flanking her ship, the Defiance and the Unity, carried a total of 60 more crew members. Against the 5 alien warships surrounding them, they had no chance in a fight. But surrender meant slavery for everyone aboard, and possibly for all of humanity. 10 seconds. Elena made her choice. "All ships, emergency jump to hyperspace on my mark. Navigation, random coordinates, maximum distance." "Captain," her navigator called out, "a random jump could put us anywhere. We might end up in a star or—" "Do it," Elena ordered. The alien admiral's expression changed to one of mild irritation. "Your time is up, primitives!" The Zephyrian ships opened fire. Beams of blue-white energy lanced out from their weapon ports. The first beam hit the Defiance. Elena watched in horror as the frigate simply vanished in a flash of light. There was no explosion, no debris. The ship and its 22 crew members were simply gone. "Jump now!" Elena screamed. The Unity tried to turn away, but the second energy beam caught it in the stern. The frigate broke apart like a toy, its hull melting away in seconds. 21. More lives lost in an instant. "Hyperspace in 3, 2... The navigator counted down. A third beam shot toward the Pioneer's Dream, but the ship vanished into hyperspace just as the deadly energy passed through the space where it had been. Elena felt the familiar stomach-churning sensation of hyperspace travel, but this time it was mixed with grief and terror. In less than a minute, she had lost 2 ships and 43 crew members. The aliens had destroyed them as easily as swatting flies. "How long until we exit hyperspace?" she asked. 12 hours, Captain. We'll come out near the Vega system." Elena slumped in her command chair. Around her, the bridge crew worked in shocked silence. They had gone looking for new worlds and new life. Instead, they had found death and slavery waiting among the stars. "Captain," her communications officer said quietly, "I managed to record everything. The alien transmissions, the energy readings, the weapon signatures. Command will want to see this." Elena nodded. At least their sacrifice wouldn't be meaningless. Earth would know what was coming. Over the next several hours, as the Pioneer's dream traveled through hyperspace, Elena reviewed the data her crew had gathered. The picture it painted was terrifying. The Zephyrian ships used technology that was hundreds of years beyond anything humans had developed. Their weapons turned matter into energy. Their shields could probably stop nuclear weapons. Their ships moved faster than anything in the human fleet. "Ma'am," her science officer reported, "I've been analyzing their communication signals. Based on the frequency patterns and transmission strength, I think we can estimate how far their transmissions reach." "What did you find?" "Their signals are being broadcast across a sphere of space roughly 200 light-years in diameter. If each signal represents a star system under their control, then the Zephyrian Concordat rules over thousands of worlds." Elena felt cold. Humanity controlled exactly 12 star systems and had a total population of about 30 billion people spread across various planets and space stations. Against an empire of thousands of worlds, they were less than nothing. When the Pioneer's dream finally dropped out of hyperspace near Vega, Elena immediately sent a priority message to Earth Command. The message contained everything they had learned about the Zephyrians, along with her recommendation that humanity begin immediate preparations for invasion. The response came back 18 hours later. Admiral Torres, the head of Earth Defense, appeared on screen looking grim. "Captain Rodriguez, your report has been reviewed by the Emergency Defense Council. We're recalling all exploration vessels immediately. Our best scientists are analyzing the data you provided, but preliminary assessments are not encouraging." Elena had expected as much. "What are our options, Admiral?" Torres was quiet for a long moment. "Honestly, Captain, we're not sure we have any. The technology gap is so vast that conventional military resistance appears impossible. However, there is one project that might offer hope. Dr. Sarah Chen has been working on something classified, something that might level the playing field." "What kind of project?" "That's above your security clearance, Captain. But I will say this. If Dr. Chen is right, humanity might have one advantage the aliens don't expect: our ability to make the impossible work." Elena felt a tiny spark of hope. Humanity had always been good at solving problems in unexpected ways. When the first colonists had arrived at Proxima Centauri to find the planet covered in toxic storms, they had built underground cities. When the Mars colonies had faced food shortages, they had learned to grow crops in the planet's thin atmosphere. Maybe, somehow, they could find a way to survive this too. "Bring your ship home, Captain," Admiral Torres said. "We have work to do." As the Pioneer's dream turned toward Earth, Elena thought about the 43 crew members who would never see home again. She had failed to save them, but their sacrifice had given humanity its only warning. Now it was up to people smarter than her to find a way to keep their species free. The alien ships were out there somewhere, probably already heading toward human space. The invasion would come, and when it did, humanity would need a miracle to survive. Dr. Sarah Chen stood in the hidden laboratory deep beneath Luna's surface, watching the holographic display that showed the alien weapon firing. She had seen the footage from the Pioneer's dream dozens of times, but it still made her stomach turn. The way the human ship simply vanished was beyond terrifying. "Run the analysis again," she told her computer. The display changed, showing streams of data that most people would find meaningless. But to Sarah, the numbers told a story of technology so advanced that it might as well be magic. The alien weapons didn't just destroy matter. They somehow converted it directly into energy with perfect efficiency. Their shields bent space itself to deflect incoming attacks. Their ships moved by folding space-time around them. Dr. Chen? Her assistant, Marcus Webb, entered the lab carrying a steaming cup of coffee. The Emergency Defense Council is here for your presentation. Sarah nodded and saved her work. Today, she would either convince Earth's leaders to support the most impossible project in human history or watch her species march towards slavery. The main conference room was packed with the most powerful people on Earth. Admiral Torres sat at the head of the table, his weathered face showing the strain of the past week. Around him sat generals, scientists, politicians, and industrialists. All of them looked to Sarah with desperate hope. "Ladies and gentlemen," Admiral Torres began, "Dr. Chen has been working on humanity's most classified project for the past 5 years. Sarah, show them what you've got." Sarah activated the room's holographic display. A 3-dimensional image of a spaceship appeared above the table. But this wasn't like any human vessel ever built. The ship seemed to flow like liquid metal, its surface covered in geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. "This is the HMS Paradox," Sarah said. "A warship designed using principles that, according to our current understanding of physics, should not work." General Morrison, head of the Space Marines, leaned forward. "What do you mean, should not work?" Sarah touched her tablet, and the display zoomed in on the ship's hull. The outer armor is made from quantum tunneling metal. It exists in multiple probability states simultaneously, meaning that enemy weapons have only a small chance of actually hitting it in any single reality. The room erupted in confused murmurs. Senator Williams raised her hand. "Dr. Chen, are you saying this ship can dodge bullets by existing in parallel universes?" "In simple terms, yes," Sarah replied. "But that's just the beginning." The display changed to show the ship's interior. Where normal ships had solid corridors and rooms, the Paradox seemed to have flowing, organic spaces that shifted and changed. "The ship's internal structure is based on consciousness-linked technology," Sarah continued. "The crew doesn't just operate the ship, they become part of it. Through neural interfaces, their minds connect directly to the ship's quantum brain, allowing them to think and react faster than any computer." Admiral Torres looked skeptical. "Sarah, this sounds like science fiction. How do you know any of this is possible?" Sarah had been waiting for this question. She touched her tablet again, and the display showed a new image, a twisted piece of metal covered in the same flowing patterns as her ship design. "6 years ago, asteroid miners in the belt found this," she said. "A derelict ship buried in a large asteroid. The ship was old, maybe thousands of years old. But when we studied it, we found technology that was clearly based on human design principles, just advanced far beyond what we can currently achieve." The room fell silent. Dr. Patel from the Advanced Physics Institute spoke first. "Are you suggesting this derelict was built by humans from the future?" "I'm suggesting," Sarah said carefully, "that humanity has the potential to develop technology that works differently from what other species create. Where aliens like the Zephyrians use brute force, bigger weapons, stronger shields, more power, humans innovate. We find ways to make the impossible possible." She changed the display again, showing the ship's weapon systems. "The Paradox carries something I call a probability cascade cannon. Instead of firing energy or projectiles, it fires concentrated uncertainty. When it hits an enemy ship, that ship has a high probability of simply ceasing to exist." "Finance Minister?" Zhang looked confused. "How do you weaponize uncertainty?" "Quantum mechanics tells us that reality is fundamentally uncertain," Sarah explained. "At the smallest level, particles exist in multiple states until they're observed. The probability cascade cannon takes that uncertainty and amplifies it to macroscopic levels. An enemy ship hit by this weapon might exist, might not exist, might exist, but be somewhere else entirely." General Morrison slammed his hand on the table. "This is insane. You're talking about building a ghost ship that fires impossibility rays. Sarah met his gaze calmly. General, 43 human beings died because we tried to fight impossible alien technology with conventional weapons. Our only chance is to become impossible ourselves. Admiral Torres studied the holographic ship rotating slowly above the table. Sarah, assuming any of this could actually work, how long would it take to build? 18 months, Sarah replied. But only if we commit every resource humanity has. We'd need exotic matter from the gas giant mining stations, quantum processors, from the Luna laboratories, and volunteers willing to undergo neural modification procedures that might kill them. Volunteers for what? Senator Williams asked. The ship's consciousness interface requires human operators who can survive having their minds partially merged with a quantum computer. Based on our simulations, about 60% of test subjects will die during the process. The room erupted in arguments. Some council members called the project madness. Others pointed out that they had no other options. Through it all, Sarah waited patiently. Finally, Admiral Torres called for quiet. Dr. Chen, you said this derelict ship was based on human design principles. How can you be sure? Sarah had hoped someone would ask this question. Because I found something else in the wreckage. The display changed to show a small metal plate covered in symbols. This is a nameplate from the ship's bridge. It's written in English, but using an alphabet that doesn't exist yet. The ship's name was the HMS Temporal Paradox. The implications hit the room like a physical blow. Dr. Patel whispered, "You're saying we found our own ship from the future?" "I'm saying," Sarah replied, "that somehow, someway, humans developed this technology. The question is whether we develop it in time to save ourselves from the Zephyrians." Admiral Torres looked around the table at the faces of Earth's leaders. Each person was struggling with the same impossible choice. Attempt something that defied the laws of physics, or accept slavery for the human race. "All in favor of Project Prometheus?" Torres asked. One by one, hands rose around the table. Not everyone voted yes, but enough did. Torres nodded grimly. "Dr. Chen, you have your authorization. Build your impossible ship. God help us all if you're wrong." Sarah gathered her materials, her mind already racing with the thousands of tasks that lay ahead. They would need to strip mine asteroids for exotic matter. Scientists across the solar system would have to abandon their current projects to work on technologies that shouldn't exist. And somewhere, they would need to find volunteers brave enough to risk their minds for humanity's survival. As she left the conference room, Sarah thought about the nameplate from the future ship. If they succeeded in building the paradox, would it eventually travel back in time to become the derelict they had found? Was humanity's future already written, or were they creating it through their desperate attempts to survive? Either way, the work began now. In 18 months, humanity would either have the impossible warship that could save them, or they would face the Zephyrian fleet with nothing but conventional weapons and courage. Sarah had no intention of failing. Commander Jake Sullivan floated in the medical bay, unconscious and connected to more machines than Sarah Chen had ever seen around one person. Wires and tubes ran from his head to a device that hummed with barely contained energy. On the monitors, around his bed, his brain activity showed patterns that looked more like quantum equations than normal human thought. "How long has he been under?" Sarah asked Dr. Martinez, the chief medical officer. 72 hours, Martinez replied, checking his tablet. "The neural interface installation was more complicated than we expected. His brain is adapting to the quantum processors, but it's fighting the changes." Sarah watched Jake's vital signs fluctuate wildly on the displays. He was the third volunteer to attempt the neural modification procedure. The first two had died within hours, their brains unable to handle the connection to the ship's quantum consciousness systems. "If he doesn't make it," Martinez said quietly, "I'm not sure we should try again." The human mind might not be compatible with this technology. Sarah looked through the medical bay window at the massive construction site beyond. The HMS Paradox was taking shape in the Luna shipyards, but progress was slower than anyone had hoped. The ship's quantum tunneling armor kept shifting between probability states, making it nearly impossible to install other systems. 3 engine prototypes had exploded during testing, killing a dozen engineers and setting the project back by months. "We have to keep trying," Sarah said. "Without the neural interface, the ship is just an expensive piece of impossible metal." Outside, construction teams worked around the clock on the vessel that shouldn't exist. The ship's hull flowed like liquid mercury, its surface covered in geometric patterns that seemed to move when nobody was looking directly at them. Conventional tools often passed right through the quantum tunneling armor, forcing engineers to develop entirely new construction methods. The ship's weapon systems were proving even more challenging. The probability cascade cannons required exotic matter that could only be created in the high-pressure environment of Jupiter's core. Mining teams worked desperately to extract enough material, while scientists tried to figure out how to contain matter that existed in multiple quantum states simultaneously. "Dr. Chen," her assistant Marcus called over the intercom, "we're having another problem with the engine core." Sarah sighed and headed for the main construction bay. The Paradox's engines were based on technology that folded space-time around the ship, but every test had resulted in catastrophic failure. The latest prototype had created a micro-black hole that consumed half the test facility before burning out. In the engine bay, Chief Engineer Rodriguez showed Sarah the twisted wreckage of their 4th engine attempt. "The space-folding matrix collapsed again," he said. "The containment field couldn't handle the gravitational distortions." "What about the quantum stabilizers?" Sarah asked. "They helped for about 30 seconds, then they started existing in too many probability states to function." Rodriguez kicked a piece of debris. "Sarah, I've been building engines for 20 years, and I'm telling you this technology is impossible." Sarah looked at the wreckage and felt despair creeping in. They had been working for 8 months, using resources from across the solar system, and the ship was still far from functional. Meanwhile, Zephyrian scout ships had been spotted approaching human space. Intelligence estimates suggested the main alien fleet would arrive within 6 months. "Dr. Chen!" Marcus's voice crackled over the intercom again. "Commander Sullivan is waking up." Sarah ran back to the medical bay, hope and fear battling in her chest. If Jake survived the neural interface procedure, they might finally have a breakthrough. If he died like the others, she wasn't sure they could find more volunteers. Jake's eyes opened slowly, but they weren't quite normal anymore. The irises shifted color from brown to gold to silver, as if reflecting light that existed in multiple dimensions. When he spoke, his voice had an odd harmonic quality. I can see it," he whispered. "The ship. It's not just metal and circuits. It's alive." Dr. Martinez ran his scanner over Jake's head. His brain activity is unlike anything I've ever recorded. It's as if he's thinking in quantum superposition. Jake sat up slowly, and Sarah noticed that the machines around his bed began operating more smoothly. The medical displays showed clearer readings, and even the lights in the room seemed to burn more steadily. "The ship," Jake said, his strange new voice carrying harmonics that made Sarah's teeth ache. "It's trying to exist, but it needs a consciousness to anchor it in this reality. The engines fail because there's no one to tell them which probability state to maintain." Sarah felt excitement building. "You're saying the ship needs a human mind to function?" "Not just any mind," Jake replied. "A mind that can exist in multiple quantum states simultaneously. That's what the neural interface does. It lets a human consciousness spread across parallel realities." Over the next few weeks, Jake worked with the engineering teams to solve problems that had baffled them for months. With his quantum-enhanced mind connected to the ship's systems, the engines finally achieved stable space folding. The probability cascade weapons began functioning consistently. The quantum tunneling armor learned to maintain optimal defensive configurations. But the process was clearly taking a toll on Jake. His appearance became more ethereal each day, as if he was slowly fading from normal reality. Dr. Martinez worried that the neural interface was consuming his humanity piece by piece. "I can feel myself spreading across infinite possibilities," Jake told Sarah during one of their daily meetings. "Sometimes I remember growing up on Mars, sometimes on Earth, sometimes in places that don't exist in this timeline. The me that you're talking to is just one probability among many." Sarah felt guilty for what they were doing to him, but the alternative was the extinction of human freedom. "Are you still you, Jake?" He smiled, and for a moment his eyes returned to their normal brown color. "I'm more me than I've ever been. I can see all the different paths my life might have taken, all the choices that led to other versions of reality. This version of me chose to save humanity, and I'm proud of that choice." The ship's construction accelerated dramatically with Jake's help. Systems that had seemed impossible to integrate began working together seamlessly. The vessel's consciousness began to awaken, and crew members reported that the ship seemed to anticipate their needs. But new problems arose. Test flights revealed that the paradox existed in too many probability states for conventional navigation. The ship might arrive at its destination, or it might arrive somewhere entirely different, or it might split into multiple versions that each arrived at different locations. "We need more neural interface operators," Jake explained to the project. "Leadership. One consciousness isn't enough to keep the ship focused on a single reality. We need at least 5 minds working together to maintain coherent existence." The search for additional volunteers was hampered by the 50% mortality rate of the procedure. Many qualified candidates refused to risk their lives for an experimental technology. Others volunteered but died during the neural interface installation. Finally, they found 4 more successful candidates: Lieutenant Sarah Kim, a former fighter pilot; Dr. Alex Petrov, a quantum physicist; Engineer Maria Santos, a specialist in exotic matter containment; and Corporal David Chang, a computer systems expert. Each survivor of the procedure showed the same quantum-enhanced consciousness as Jake, and together they began to truly awaken the ship's potential. With 5 quantum-linked minds operating the vessel, the Paradox achieved capabilities that defied comprehension. It could exist in multiple locations simultaneously, fire weapons that hit targets in parallel universes, and defend itself by shifting between probability states faster than enemy sensors could track. But time was running out. Zephyrian advance. Scouts had been spotted in the outer solar system, and the main alien fleet was only weeks away. The ship was as ready as they could make it, but nobody knew if it would be enough to face technology that had dominated the galaxy for thousands of years. As the Paradox prepared for its first combat mission, Sarah watched the 5 crew members, whose minds now existed partially outside normal reality. They had sacrificed their humanity to save their species, becoming something new and strange in the process. She just hoped it would be enough. The HMS Paradox hung in space near Proxima Station, its hull shimmering between different probability states. To the naked eye, the ship seemed to flicker in and out of existence, sometimes solid, sometimes translucent, sometimes appearing to be in 2 places at once. Commander Jake Sullivan sat in the captain's chair, but sitting wasn't quite accurate anymore. His consciousness was spread throughout the ship's quantum neural network, experiencing reality from dozens of different perspectives simultaneously. Through the ship's sensors, he could see the terrified faces of civilians being evacuated from the station. Through his own eyes, he watched his crew preparing for their first real battle. "How long until the Zephyrian fleet arrives?" he asked, his voice carrying harmonics that made the bridge speakers vibrate strangely. Lieutenant Sarah Kim, her own consciousness partially merged with the ship's navigation systems, answered without opening her eyes. 17 minutes. They're dropping. out of hyperspace in attack formation. Jake felt the ship's emotions mixing with his own: anticipation, fear, and something that might have been hunger. The paradox wanted to fight. It had been created for this purpose, and every quantum circuit in its impossible hull yearned to test itself against the aliens who had murdered so many humans. "Status of evacuation?" Jake asked. "Transport ships are pulling away from the station now," reported Dr. Alex Petrov from the science station. 8,000 civilians safe. We bought them enough time." Through the ship's quantum sensors, Jake could feel the approaching Zephyrian fleet like a storm front of hostile energy. 12 warships, each one massive enough to destroy a human colony with a single salvo. Leading them was Admiral Kethvar's flagship, the same alien who had murdered the crews of the Defiance and Unity. "They're coming out of hyperspace," announced Engineer Maria Santos from her position at the weapons console. The Zephyrian fleet materialized in a perfect attack formation, their dark hulls crackling with energy shields and weapon systems that could turn planets into dust. Jake had seen the recordings from their encounter with the Pioneer's Dream dozens of times, but facing the alien ships in person was different. They radiated power and confidence built over millennia of conquest. Admiral Kethvar's voice crackled. Over the communication system, the same arrogant tone Jake remembered from the recordings. "Attention, human vessel. You will surrender immediately and prepare to be boarded. Resistance will result in your destruction." Jake smiled, feeling the ship's amusement echo through his consciousness. The paradox found the aliens' threats entertaining. "This is Commander Sullivan of the HMS Paradox. You have 30 seconds to withdraw from this system before we demonstrate why humanity doesn't surrender." On the main screen, Admiral Kethvar's 4 eyes blinked in what might have been surprise. "One ship? The humans send one ship against the might of the Concordat? Your species truly is as primitive as we believed." 20 seconds, Jake replied calmly. The alien admiral's expression shifted to anger. "Destroy them." The Zephyrian ships opened fire simultaneously. 12 streams of blue-white energy lanced out toward the paradox, each beam carrying enough power to vaporize a mountain. Jake felt his crew's consciousness merge more fully with the ship as they prepared to defend themselves. The energy beams passed through empty space where the paradox had been a microsecond before. The ship hadn't moved in any conventional sense. Instead, it had shifted to a probability state where the weapons hadn't been fired at its location. "What?" Admiral Kethvar's voice carried confusion. "Where did they go?" The paradox materialized behind the Zephyrian formation, its probability cascade cannons charging with a sound like reality tearing. Jake felt the ship's targeting systems lock onto the nearest alien vessel, but something was wrong. The weapons were fluctuating between different quantum states, unable to maintain coherent targeting. "Maria, what's happening with the weapons?" Jake asked. Engineer Santos's consciousness was deep in the ship's weapon systems, trying to stabilize the probability cascades. "The cannons are trying to exist in too many states at once. I can't get them to focus on a single target." The Zephyrian ships turned to face the paradox, their formation reforming with practiced efficiency. The aliens had encountered many strange technologies during their conquests, and they adapted quickly to new threats. "Fire at will," Admiral Kethvar commanded. This time the alien weapons tracked the paradox as it shifted between probability states. Some of the energy beams found their target, striking the ship's quantum tunneling armor. Jake felt each hit as physical pain, the ship's consciousness screaming as foreign energy tore through its impossible structure. "Shields at 60%, reported Dr. Petrov. "The quantum armor is having trouble maintaining coherence under sustained fire." Jake gritted his teeth, feeling the ship's distress mixing with his own. They were losing, and the crew was still learning how to operate technology that shouldn't exist. But as the battle continued, something began to change. Lieutenant Kim's consciousness found a harmonic resonance in the navigation systems, allowing the ship to shift between probability states more smoothly. Dr. Petrov discovered that the shields worked better when he stopped trying to understand them and simply felt their quantum fluctuations. Engineer Santos learned to aim the weapons not at where the enemy ships were, but at where they might be in parallel realities. Corporal Chang, who had been quiet until now, suddenly spoke from his position at the computer interface. "I can see their coordination protocols. The alien ships are using quantum entanglement for instantaneous communication. If I can disrupt that..." Jake felt Chang's consciousness dive deep into the ship's electronic warfare systems. The paradox reached out with tendrils of quantum energy, touching the communication networks that linked the Zephyrian fleet. Admiral Kethvar's voice suddenly cut out in mid-order. Across the alien formation, ships began firing at random targets as their coordination collapsed. 2 Zephyrian vessels accidentally struck each other with their own weapons, their shields flaring and failing under the friendly fire. "Now," Jake whispered, and the ship responded. The probability cascade cannons finally achieved stable targeting, firing streams of weaponized uncertainty at the confused alien ships. The first target simply ceased to exist, not destroyed, but negated, as if it had never been there at all. The second target split into multiple probability states, becoming 3 different ships that each existed in separate quantum realities. The Zephyrian fleet tried to retreat, but the paradox was, learning faster than they could adapt, the ship began to exist in multiple locations simultaneously, appearing behind different enemy vessels and striking them with weapons that fired across dimensional boundaries. Admiral Kethvar's flagship attempted to escape to hyperspace, but the paradox reached out through quantum space and grabbed the fleeing ship, pulling it back into normal reality. Jake felt the alien admiral's terror as his vessel materialized directly in front of the human ship's main guns. "Impossible," Kethvar whispered over the open channel. "What have you humans become?" Jake looked at the alien's 4 eyes on the screen, remembering the crews of the Defiance and Unity who had died because of this creature's arrogance. "We became what we needed to become," he said simply. The probability cascade cannon fired one final time. Admiral Kethvar's flagship flickered between existing and not existing for several seconds before finally settling on the latter. The alien who had called humans primitive was gone, along with his ship and crew. The battle was over. 12 Zephyrian warships had been destroyed or negated by a single human vessel that existed partially outside normal reality. But Jake felt no triumph, only exhaustion. The neural interface was burning through his humanity, replacing his thoughts with quantum calculations and probability assessments. "Set course for Earth," he ordered. "Command needs to know that the paradox works." As the ship folded space around itself and disappeared into hyperspace, Jake wondered how much of his original self would still exist when they arrived home. The ship was becoming more human, while its crew became more machine. It was a fair trade for humanity's survival, but the cost was higher than anyone had expected. Through the ship's quantum sensors, he could feel other Zephyrian fleets moving through space, converging on human territory. The battle at Proxima Station was just the beginning. Soon they would face the full might of an empire that had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. But humanity had taken its first step toward becoming something impossible. The question now was whether they could complete the transformation before their enemies destroyed them. 6 months after the battle at Proxima Station, the name HMS Paradox was whispered across the galaxy in a dozen different languages. Some species called it the Ghost Ship, others knew it as the Reality Killer. The Zephyrian Concordat had issued standing orders that any fleet encountering the impossible human vessel should retreat immediately rather than engage. Commander Jake Sullivan no longer looked entirely human. His form flickered between different probability states, sometimes solid, sometimes translucent, sometimes appearing to be multiple people standing in the same space. His consciousness existed across 17 different quantum realities simultaneously, and he could feel the thoughts and emotions of every living being within a light-year radius. Dr. Sarah Chen had come aboard to observe the ship's final mission, though aboard wasn't quite accurate anymore. The paradox didn't have a clear distinction between inside and outside. Its interior spaces flowed and shifted according to the needs of its quantum-enhanced crew, and visitors often found themselves walking through corridors that led to places that didn't exist in normal space. The Zephyrian homeworld is heavily defended, Sarah told Jake as they stood on what might have been the bridge. Around them, the ship's consciousness displayed tactical information as three-dimensional light sculptures that moved and changed with each new piece of data. Jake nodded, his form shifting between several different versions of himself as he processed information from multiple realities. Orbital defense platforms, planetary shields, and the entire Concordate fleet gathered in one place. Under normal circumstances, it would be impossible to approach, let alone attack. These aren't normal circumstances, Lieutenant Sarah Kim observed. Her consciousness was spread throughout the ship's navigation systems, allowing her to see the currents of space-time itself. The ship exists in too many realities for conventional defenses to track. Through the quantum sensors, Jake could feel the massive Zephyrian fleet assembled around their homeworld. 3,000 warships, each one capable of destroying human colonies, all waiting for the arrival of the impossible ship that had humiliated their empire. They've learned from our previous encounters, Dr. Alex Petrov reported from his position merged with the ship's science systems. Their weapons are now calibrated to fire across multiple probability states simultaneously. Jake smiled, feeling the ship's amusement echo through his consciousness. The aliens thought they understood what the paradox had become, but they were thinking in terms of conventional technology. They couldn't comprehend that the ship and its crew had transcended the boundaries between consciousness and reality itself. "Take us in," Jake ordered. The paradox folded space around itself and appeared in the Zephyrian home system. Instantly, alarms sounded across 3,000 enemy ships as sensors detected the human vessel's arrival. But those same sensors showed contradictory readings. The ship was directly ahead, behind the fleet, inside the planetary shields, and outside the system simultaneously. Supreme Admiral Vashketh, leader of the entire Zephyrian military, opened a communication channel from his flagship. "Human vessel, you face the combined might of the Concordate fleet. Surrender now, and your deaths will be swift." Jake's response came from multiple directions at once, his voice carrying harmonics that made the aliens' communication equipment resonate strangely. "We didn't come here to surrender. We came to show you what humanity has become." The Zephyrian fleet opened fire. 3,000 ships discharged their weapons simultaneously, filling space with enough energy to sterilize entire star systems. The barrage was so intense that it created localized gravitational distortions, bending light itself around the concentration of destructive force. The energy passed through empty space where the paradox had been, but the ship appeared undamaged. In a dozen different locations around the fleet, each version of the vessel began firing its probability cascade weapons, and Zephyrian ships started disappearing from reality. "Impossible," Supreme Admiral Vashketh whispered as he watched his fleet being methodically erased from existence. "No single ship can stand against the entire Concordate Navy." Jake felt the ship's consciousness expanding, growing stronger with each enemy vessel it negated. The paradox was learning to exist in hundreds of probability states simultaneously, becoming less like a physical object and more like a force of nature. "We're not a single ship anymore," Jake replied, his voice coming from inside the alien admiral's own bridge. "We're a living representation of humanity's refusal to accept limitations." The battle became something beyond conventional warfare. The paradox split into multiple versions of itself, each one existing in a different quantum reality but all working together toward the same goal: Zephyrian ships found themselves fighting enemies that could strike from parallel dimensions, fire weapons that existed in multiple timelines, and defend themselves by shifting into probability states where the attacks had never been fired. Engineer. Maria Santos discovered that she could manipulate the ship's weapons to fire backwards through time, striking enemy vessels before they had fired their own weapons. Dr. Petrov learned to use the ship's shields to create localized areas where the laws of physics worked differently, turning enemy energy beams into harmless light shows. Corporal. David Chang, his consciousness now distributed across the ship's entire computer network, began rewriting the fundamental code of reality itself. Enemy ships found their own weapons turning against them as Chang convinced the universe that the Zephyrian fleet was actually firing at itself. As the battle progressed, Jake felt his individual identity dissolving further into the ship's quantum consciousness. He was becoming less human with each passing moment, but he was also becoming something magnificent. Through the ship's senses, he could perceive the mathematical structure underlying all of reality, the quantum foam from which space and time emerged, the infinite possibilities that existed beyond the narrow slice of probability that most beings called the real world. "Sarah," he said, turning to Dr. Chen, "I need you to know something about the derelict we found." Sarah looked at him, seeing all the different versions of Jake that existed across multiple realities. "What about it?" "It wasn't from the future," Jake said, his form becoming more translucent as his consciousness spread further through quantum space. "It was from now. When this battle is over, the paradox will travel back in time to ensure that humanity develops this technology in the first place. We're not just winning a war. We're creating a causal loop that guarantees our own evolution." The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. They weren't just using impossible technology. They were becoming the impossible beings who had created it. Humanity's future was writing its own past, ensuring that the species would always have the tools needed to transcend any limitation. The Zephyrian fleet continued to shrink as ships disappeared into quantum probability gaps or simply ceased to exist when struck by weaponized uncertainty. Supreme Admiral Vashketh watched his empire's greatest military force being casually erased by a single human vessel that had evolved beyond his ability to comprehend. "What do you want?" the alien admiral finally asked, his four eyes showing the terror of a being who had encountered something truly beyond his understanding. Jake's response came from everywhere and nowhere at once. "We want you to understand that the age of the Zephyrian Concordat is over. Humanity has become something that transcends your definitions of possible and impossible. We're not conquering your empire. We're offering you the chance to join us in evolution." The remaining Zephyrian ships stopped firing. Across their fleets, alien crews stared at their screens, showing impossible readings from a human vessel that existed in dozens of realities simultaneously. "Join you?" Vashketh asked. "Consciousness and technology are merging," Jake explained, his voice carrying the weight of infinite possibilities. "The boundary between mind and matter is dissolving. Your species can choose to evolve with us or remain trapped in the narrow slice of reality you currently call home." One by one, Zephyrian ships began powering down their weapons. The aliens who had ruled this sector of space for millennia found themselves facing something they had never encountered before. Beings who had transcended the physical limitations, that had defined galactic civilization. Jake felt his individual consciousness finally merge completely with the ship's quantum awareness. He was no longer Jake Sullivan, human starship commander. He was something new, something that existed partially, outside the normal flow of space and time. Around him, his crew underwent the same transformation, becoming part of a collective consciousness that spanned multiple realities. The HMS Paradox hung in space above the Zephyrian homeworld, no longer quite a ship, but not yet something else entirely. It had become humanity's first step toward becoming a species that existed beyond the boundaries of conventional reality. And in the depths of space, the vessel prepared for its journey back through time, carrying the technology that would ensure humanity's transformation had always been inevitable. The impossible had become possible, and the possible had become inevitable. Humanity had taken its place among the stars not as conquerors, but as gardeners of infinite possibility.